Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Tarkan Maner, CEO at Nexenta, and we are today with 451 Research, specifically with Simon Robinson, VP Research at 451 Research, and we're live from London.
Yay!
We're broadcasting from sunny Palm Tree, London, and the topic is 2015 storage predictions and trends. And by the way, as part of this promotion, I also want to mention that Simon is one of the co-authors of the latest report from 451 on 2015 trends in storage, available from 451 Research. I'm sure, Simon, you're going to talk about that. But before we get to that, just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that this is part of our monthly webinar series on storage trends on behalf of Nexenta. And obviously, we've done a few webinars with Simon before. We had a great response from our customers and partners, so we're repeating that again and starting 2015 with a big energy. For those who are not very familiar with Nexenta, we know from the audience there are some few new prospect customers and partners listening in. Nexenta is one of the global leaders in software-defined storage with a big focus on open source collaboration and with software-defined data center innovation built on commodity hardware, as many of you know. From partners like Dell to Supermicro to Inventec to Quanta to SanDisk to Western Digital to Seagate, we partner with many different hardware vendors and work with many different cloud platform vendors, from VMware to Citrix, from Citrix to Microsoft, to OpenStack to CloudStack, and many different cloud service providers. With our 6,000 customers around the world, almost 1/3 of it in hosting services, we have very tight relationships with these hosting service providers, also touching customers in small, medium businesses, and even consumers with our technology. So we provide software-defined storage solutions on commodity hardware with open source collaboration to customers around the world in public sector as well as in private sector as enterprises directly, but also 1/3 of our customers, almost 2,000 of them, are using OpenStack, CloudStack, open source innovation and delivering cloud services to their customers in SOHO business, small businesses, and consumers. So on that note, over the past 12 months, we had 30,000 new downloads on our commodity and community software solution running on commodity hardware. And we generated nearly $300 million since the inception of the company in our ecosystem for overall software-defined data center with our hardware partners around the world. So in that sense, from a revenue generation perspective, as a pure play vendor, we enjoy a leadership position, and that's the reason we enjoy the partnerships with 451 Research, because we believe in their analysis, specifically, which Simon is going to go over today, the first generation analysis they do and research they do with their customers. It's not only third-party analysis they create, but actually they go to the resource, they talk to the customers and get the information. So on that note, here is Simon Robinson, VP Research at 451. Simon?
Great, thank you. Thanks, Tarkan. Great to have you in person for one of these things for a change. So happy to, delighted to be speaking today. I'm going to be spending a bit of time, as Tarkan says, talking through some of the research and the predictions that we've made for what we can expect to see in enterprise storage spending and trends and technologies for 2015. I've been in the covering the storage space for 451 as an analyst here for 15 years, and there's no doubt in my mind this is the most exciting period of transformation, of disruption, of change within the IT space generally, but also the storage space specifically. There is just so much interesting, cool, sometimes challenging, but some fascinating developments taking place in the industry, and I think this is just a really, really great time to be watching developments and covering innovative companies like Nexenta. So let's start by just giving a little advertisement of 451 Research. If you're not familiar with the company, we're an industry analyst firm. We were founded back in the year 2000, so this is our 15th year of business. We've got about a couple of hundred employees, about 100 analysts, and really our focus is on innovation in enterprise IT. So right across the board, from cloud business models to storage systems, big data analytics to mobile devices. Our mission really is to understand how these future and emerging trends and technologies are really changing the way that we as organizations, as individuals, as businesses leverage IT for the benefit of ourselves and our families, and also for our businesses. So we do have a broad remit. We also, as Tarkan mentioned, we make huge efforts to understand exactly what is happening at the coalface, and we speak to several thousand individuals at many organisations, thousands of organisations every year, asking them a whole range of questions around their environments, around the spending plans, around their pain points and challenges, and that gives us some real interesting points, some of which I'm going to share today around how this market and landscape is evolving. So with that out of the way, let's get to, I've boiled down, as Tarkan mentioned, that document, the research report around trends for 2015 into 5 predictions. So let's start with number 1, do more with less. Now this is, this won't come to as a surprise to anybody, I don't think, because we're all operating in this constrained environment where budgets are being challenged like never before, where we're asked to show or demonstrate a payback from a project often in record time. And if you don't have a demonstrable ROI in a project, it simply doesn't get approved. And at the same time, we have all these new alternatives for IT. If you as a business are not delivering the service levels, the performance, the capabilities that the business demands, then guess what? The organisation has got new alternatives. They can go to the cloud. So I think it's incumbent upon IT to be the agent of change. And I think the storage teams, storage folks, can be a really big part of this transformation. So this slide just shows some of our latest data on spending. You know, absolutely, there's no doubt that storage budgets are flat, continue to be very constrained. There's a few signs that the spending is easing in places. There have been many organisations that have delayed refresh for several years. Now they are starting to come to the point where they just have to do some refresh. So a little bit of that going on, but make no bones about it. This is a time where organisations are looking to they're changing their thinking around how they deal with some of these age-old problems, because quite simply the way they've done things in the past are just not going to be always viable going forwards. So in terms of the pain points that we see in storage, you know, ever since we've been doing this research, this is through our Voice of the Customer research. We've been doing this in storage for over 10 years, and capacity growth has always been the #1 pain point. And anybody who's got any familiarity with storage understands this point. Yes, hard drive densities are going up and prices are coming down, but actually dealing with that pace of growth that is still the #1 pain point. I'd also like to point out, though, that storage performance has really come onto the chart in the last 2 or 3 years as a really major pain point, as a top 2 or top 3 pain point. So the challenge really is dealing with 2 things. It's dealing with the capacity growth, storing all this much more data that we have, but it's also meeting some very pressing performance requirements and challenges that the storage teams have been challenged with. So that is starting to prompt some new thinking. Move on. What does all of this add up to? Well, essentially, we think that storage is at a breaking point. You know, if we think about how our many storage environments look today, I liken it to an accidental architecture. We have storage has always been acquired and bought as a response to a particular application. Therefore, we've got a multiplicity of fragmented, complex, isolated silos of storage within the data center. Many of them have their own language. They require specific skills. And okay, each one may in turn solve their own problems, but they add up to such a huge amount of complexity if you multiply each of those platforms by 20 or 30. So really, we think it's time for a different approach, and that if you're going to solve some of the fundamental storage challenges, you actually have to get your arms around this operational complexity. It's the cost of managing this diverse, fragmented environment that is the real killer for many organizations. So, okay, if that's the environment we're operating in, how must storage evolve to fit some of these new things that are emerging? Well, just to kind of summarize what we see as the new style of IT versus the old style, really it's night and day. We're seeing some fundamentally different requirements placed on the data center and the IT operation, moving from IT as a cost center to IT as actually a differentiator, something that can drive value, can drive business growth, something that really is at the heart of taking the organization to where it needs to be. We've seen obviously a huge trend in the last 5 years of the emergence of the cloud model, organizations looking at how they get onto that through hybrid and other approaches. The other huge trend is that we've seen the dismantling really of the traditional client-server application paradigm in IT to a composite cloud-based applications. Obviously, many of these applications running, globally, many of them stateless, and almost all of the new ones being accessed primarily through a mobile device and not through a traditional PC. So that really has some fundamental implications for the way we think about where and how we store the data serving those applications. Similarly, seen changes in the file sync and share space. A huge one being this change we're seeing in terms of how data center infrastructure is built and operated, moving from these silos of server network and storage to moving to more converged and integrated approaches. So all of this really, I think, highlights some of the changes that is going on at a high level. At the same time, storage needs to respond to deal with many of these challenges. So here's a summary on this slide of some of the ways in which storage is evolving. I'll be drilling down into a couple of these, but obviously we're seeing the emergence of software-defined approaches. We're seeing flash have a huge impact in the primary storage space. But really also many of the languages and protocols and interfaces that have dominated storage are starting to evolve and change. So moving from the paradigm of RAID to terms like and technologies like erasure coding, moving from files to objects, moving beyond interfaces like Fibre Channel and iSCSI and file interfaces to HDFS, to API-based storage management, storage integration. This is the way that applications speak. This is the way that new applications speak now. And storage needs to catch up and play an active role in that. So this is also driving the narrative forward in the storage space as well. So one of the things that we see kind of emerging here, and this is not to say this is going to happen overnight or even in the next couple of years, but we are seeing the emergence of what we think are divergent or a bifurcating architecture landscape in storage. We're going to see the emergence of what I call fast storage, so flash-driven primary storage is going to evolve and drive the IOPS side of delivering storage performance, going back to the performance point I was making earlier. And then the other side of the spectrum, we're going to see the emergence of big storage, so object-driven storage architectures for the capacity aspect of storage. And I think this offers a way for us to simplify the way that storage architected. If we can boil down the many tiers that many organizations have today into is it hot or is it cold, then this gives us maybe a template for how to address some of that operational complexity through simplifying down to fewer silos. So let's spend some time on software-defined. Software-defined is kind of one of those terms in the industry that you can't really avoid these days. Certainly is very marketing driven. It's ubiquitous. It's lacking a little bit of definition, but in our experience, in our research shows that it really is starting to resonate within enterprise audiences. So this slide shows some research we've been doing in the last year, talking to IT decision makers at medium and large organisations globally, and we've been asking them specifically how software-defined data centre plays into your strategic plans. So just to explain the chart a little bit, on the left side we have the blue data points. They are organisations, respondents that agreed or completely agree with the statement, we are planning to strategically move to a software-defined data centre. What we've seen really is a huge change in the last year. A year ago, a minority of organisations had this as a real part of their strategic plan. By the end of 2014, we now saw that more than half of organisations agreed to some extent that this is how they are strategically evolving their IT. So that says to me that this is a struck a chord within the industry. You know, definitions may be still evolving, but decision makers like the principle of a software-driven approach because they think it's going to deliver them the agility and operational simplicity that they require. So just a few points on what we think software-defined means in a storage context. You know, we think you know, a big part of this is centralized management. Terms like virtualization have been around for a long time in storage, never really got beyond being pretty niche, to be honest. I think the opportunity here and the appeal is by divorcing the control plane of storage. You often hear about this term, the control plane. It's been, historically, it's been so tightly bound to the storage system, and that has led to a lot of the complexity we have today, as well as a lot of the cost. By divorcing that control plane from the physical hardware and, you know, having an abstraction layer, we think that, you know, that kind of approach is the way that organisations deal with this complexity. So also that software-driven approach allows you to take a much more commodity, hardware-driven approach to actually deploying a lot of this infrastructure. You know, one of the realities today is that most storage systems from the big vendors already run commodity hardware. So really, we just need to kind of take that next step to truly, you know, emancipate the hardware, if you like. Open source is a huge part of this transition. Storage and open source have not necessarily been tight bedfellows in the storage space recently. That is really starting to change. Obviously, folks like Nexenta with ZFS, but also other approaches out there in the market. Really, the momentum and the interest in those approaches shows that A, they're ready for prime time, they're ready for starting to be and are being deployed in mission critical environments, and also buyers really like the economics of that model. Most importantly, perhaps, a software-defined approach can actually allow you to take a fundamentally different approach to designing a storage system and storage infrastructure. So we think that object is a big part of that. I'll come on to talk about that shortly. Another huge part of it is hyper-convergence, and this is a space we're tracking very closely because it's just exploded in the last year. You're seeing huge amounts of interest from Nexenta partners like VMware, really embracing this kind of model. Loads of startups here, and lots of interest in hyper-convergence. On the flip side, you know, when we're out there talking to customers, to end users, you know, there is in some places some pushback around software-defined, and really we think this is more an educational thing more than anything else, but they are worth mentioning. Firstly, actually, when it comes down to it, lots of customers like appliances. They like having software that is tightly bound to the hardware, because when things go wrong, there's one number to call, there's one throat to choke. It also simplifies that buying and implementation experience. So I think really what we need to do is reach a happy middle ground where we have software-defined approaches that are certified to run in certain hardware environments. Another thing we've heard is that isn't software-defined just lock-in at, you know, another level? Well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. you're not going to get away from lock-in completely at any level. And if you're going to lock in, you're better locking in at the software level, where you've got more choice then on when it comes to the underlying hardware. And ultimately, customers do value and do often really want that to be able to have that partner, to be able to have a vendor handhold them through any problems. So it's a little bit of a spurious argument, that one. In terms of the benefits of a software-defined storage approach, well, this rolls up some recent survey work that we've done. Essentially, users are telling us there are 3 core benefits to a software-defined approach. Firstly, that this allows me to save hardware costs, to save CapEx, because I'm able to move to a much more commodity-based approach. Secondly, it's providing me new levels of agility. It allows me to roll services out more quickly. It allows me to provision storage more quickly, that kind of thing. And thirdly, it reduces OpEx because I'm standardizing, I'm having a central point of management, and that is a route to simplification which reduces the overall cost of managing the environment. Okay, prediction number 4, Flash. I mentioned this earlier. Flash is just it's really reshaping the primary storage landscape as we see it. This has been kind of bubbling along for 4 or 5 years, but in the last year it's absolutely exploded, and we think within a couple of years almost every primary storage workload is going to be driven out of Flash media and solid state. You know, we think that Flash is going to be everywhere. It's going to be host-based. Flash is a tier in a hybrid array. All Flash array has been a really interesting emerging space. But also we think that, you know, this just doesn't begin and end with the media itself. It's what does that enable us to do in terms of new architectures, new approaches. So we're seeing what's happening here in terms of innovation of Flash optimized architectures. When you marry that with some of the VM level management that we're seeing through VMware and others in this space, that starts to get interesting. And another space where we're really only starting to see the benefit of this is using Flash and solid state as a starting point for a new category of memory-based applications. So in-memory analytics, SAP HANA, this kind of thing, Hadoop data analysis. I think we're only really starting to understand where this might be able to take us, and that's why we're so excited by the future of prospect of Flash. So very quickly, just this slide just summarizes in our conversations with end users where they are in terms of their Flash roadmaps and implementations today. On the left, in the red, you'll see that the technology is in use, and we can see that Flash as a tier in a hybrid array is already, you know, majority of enterprises using that. Flash in servers has plateaued a little bit, but we think that's going to come back strongly as the hyper-convergence model becomes more popular. And finally, there's this all-flash array space, which has gone from being you know, very niche a year ago to absolutely exploding into the mainstream, and huge amount of pent-up interest in that. 2014 was the year of the all-flash array that it came into its own, we believe, and we expect to see that continue in 2015. So final prediction is, you know, as a kind of counterpoint to Flash, is what's happening at the other side of the spectrum. And I mentioned Object. You know, we think that Object is, you know, potentially one of those architectures that may not be hugely adopted today, but is absolutely going to drive us forward and allow us to evolve our storage environments for the era of big data, for the petabyte era, if you like. So Object has been around probably as a technology for over 10 years. You know, I think it's really interesting because of a couple of factors. Firstly, it's software defined by you know, by definition. It's inherently scalable. It's scale out. It allows us to take advantage of commodity hardware and deploy it in a pay-as-you-grow fashion. So we think there's a whole lot of interest there for the long tail of storage that organizations are now generating. We're now only 10 years, 15 years into the digital revolution. We're already drowning in data. Technologies like RAID start to break down when you get to petabyte levels of scale. And we think that object-based approaches with erasure coding and other technologies really do offer us a way forward into the future. And I think there's a whole lot of innovation going on here from from Nexenta and others in this object storage market. So just to sum up, what does all this mean, and what are some of the key takeaways? Well, it's clear that I think this new economic imperative really is driving new types of thinking in storage. I think this new style of IT does require a new style of storage, and that every organisation should be thinking what's happening in this new application paradigm, what's happening in my DevOps environment. And if you're a storage guy, you should be thinking, what can I do to best enable these guys to get the most out of their applications? How do I need to evolve my own thinking? So there's a ton going on there. This software-defined thing is really caught fire, I think, in the last year. And I think this is the year that we'll start to see the interest translate from just that interest into actual momentum and real deployments. I think we'll see a lot more maturation, hardening of capabilities. I think flash and compute-centric architectures, as we've discussed, are really completely changing the primary storage dynamic. And at the other side of the spectrum, object is another architecture for the future. Early days for sure in object, but lots of interest. And I'd urge anybody with a significant content and data storage problem to take a look at an object-based approach. That's all I had for you guys. I'll hand you back to Tarkan.
This is fantastic. Only very few people can make storage sound exciting and sexy, and you're one of them. Even though it's a topic to most not understood well, but the way you went through some of these mega trends and explained, and the key thing on top of the explanation, to have that in a primary research way, talking to customers and getting the exact data and research data from the customers directly makes a big difference. And as a matter of fact, Simon and I, we were talking about this earlier. Last January, in 2014, we had Simon actually in Amsterdam in our first kickoff meeting for EMEA, and he had the same slide with those two bar charts, I think the slide 9 in Simon's deck, and with the first half of 2014 from 2013. And the slide said software-defined storage is basically said no by 60–70% of the audience. And my reaction to Simon was, I don't believe this thing cannot happen. Software-defined storage must be happening because we're growing 100% year over year. And Simon's answer was to me, wait, it will happen. We're seeing the trending, but at this snapshot, at that time, the respondents responded, obviously at that time, only 30–35% were doing software-defined storage in some shape or form. But these trends, what you showed, clearly are in line with what we see at Nexenta. On that note, to segue into Nexenta's story, basically we're going to talk about Nexenta a little bit for a few minutes, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience, live audience, as we always do in our webinar series. Overall, in addition what we heard from Simon, from a CEO perspective, as we're talking to many CEOs, what we're hearing, obviously they're dealing with business issues tying to economic fluctuation in their respective industries and segments. Obviously compliance issues they have as CEOs and boards. They are dealing with emerging market opportunities and risks, what's happening there. Obviously corporate social responsibility, public-private partnerships, creating more data for large organizations and mid-sized organizations, and obviously innovation. How can organizations innovate in their business processes and technologies they use so they can gain competitive advantage? Tying that obviously to shareholder value. As a CEO, also you're running your own business, Simon, to a certain extent. Even though you are a VP research, you're equity holder in the company, you watch your cost. The same way as Nexenta, as we're growing our business, working with our customers, we see our customers following the same notion that Simon talked about, doing more with less. So having said all that, shareholder valuation ties back to the big trends, create more opportunities, more revenues, but with less cost. So on that note, We're seeing our customers looking into new opportunities around social media, around mobility, Internet of Things, and those newly connected devices, new beacon devices, new wearables, the new physical web architecture that Intel, Google, and many other companies are leading, creating not only petabytes, we're seeing zettabytes of data. That's why, by the way, we call our file system ZFS. We started that journey many years before, thinking the data workloads are going to be at a level that we never seen before. In the past, we talked about kilobytes and megabytes and gigabytes, and now we're talking petabytes. Now we have customers at Nexenta, we're seeing hundreds of petabytes of deployments and planning. In one of the big web scale companies, we're seeing now a deal that we're looking at actually for 500 petabytes in one shot. Obviously, it's going to be delivered over a certain time period, tying to what Simon said, from block to file to object storage, and tying all these software-defined architectures into the ecosystem. So having said all this, with all these trends, customers are looking for newly deployed hybrid private public cloud infrastructure, depending on the segments they're in, like Simon talked about. From our customer feedback that we work with, we created almost $300 million ecosystem revenue with our partners over the past 6 years since the inception of Nexenta. What we've been seeing is that customers are looking around those trends that Simon talked about. Convergence obviously is a big deal. Hybrid systems moving to flash. One area that we're hearing a lot from our customers, intelligent architectures, that the storage systems become much more workload application aware and in an agnostic way on any component, from flash to hard disk, on any x86 server, from Dell to Cisco to Inventec to Quanta to Supermicro, everything in between, and for any cloud platform, from VMware to Citrix to Microsoft Hyper-V to vSphere to Xen to CloudStack to OpenStack, Swift, Cinder, or to even to an S3-enabled cloud service provider. So customers want that choice. Like Simon talked about, we're seeing as Nexenta that big opportunity through software-defined storage as the lead in the software-defined data center system. Actually, we call that in our company at Nexenta as OpenSDx. Open source collaboration, open source file systems meet software-defined data center, software-defined storage innovation with commodity hardware. So on that note, Nexenta developed a series of products, a suite of products. One of them is Nexenta Store, which is our flagship solution for block file storage based on ZFS. File system scales up in a big way and basically covers thousands of customers today. Almost 6,000 customers, from education to healthcare to manufacturing to automotive to hosting services. We're seeing a lot of success with Nexenta Store. But like Simon said, this was not enough for our customers and us. So that's why we decided to move into a scale-out storage with Nexenta Edge, which is our new technology based on cloud copy on write technology, which is innovated by us, which we have about 8 patents already filed around this technology. It delivers basically scalability to hundreds of thousands of servers within web-oriented architectures for web-oriented, web-scale companies. These companies, not only the Twitters of the world, eBays of the world, Facebooks of the world, or Googles of the world. Now companies, the technologies we use every day, the consumer good companies, the telcos, the education services, higher education organizations like University of Sussex in the UK, like Harvard University, like Stanford University, are looking for very high-end scale-out technologies, but possibly delivered from a single pane of glass, orchestrated both for block and file and object, delivers simplicity for them, intelligence for them, and provisioning capabilities with a technology we actually coined as Nexenta Fusion. Another product portfolio we have Nexenta Connect. Nexenta Connect is our solution, as Simon talked about, is our integration platform, connection platform, the acceleration optimization platform for VMware, for Citrix, for Microsoft, for CloudStack and OpenStack. We deliver solutions for VMware vCenter, supporting VMware platform with our file services, object services capabilities. We integrate into Xen environment for CloudStack and for Citrix. We support vSphere, vCenter environment for easy management and centralization for VMware environments. Hyper-V support for Microsoft customers. But none of our customers using one technology. They are hybrid. They are agnostic, they are cross-platform, they want choice, and we give them that software-only choice that Simon talked about. Nexenta has been in this business for a long time. As you all know, there are many other customers, many other vendors in that space. Our uniqueness, our differentiation, our leadership came true because of this product portfolio, but also the partnership ecosystem. Both with global distributors from SoftBank in Japan to Korean Telecom in Korea to China Unicom and Lenovo and Inventec in China and Taiwan to partners in France, UK, and Germany, and to US and to Latin America. Nexenta started this market landscape over the past 6 years with a big focus on channels. As Simon talked about earlier from a 451 perspective, appliances still gain momentum because they're easy to deploy. Without partners, Nexenta would not be able to deliver that simplicity to the customers. The reason we gained 6,000 customers when we have nearly 30,000 downloads of our community software from enterprise customers is because of that partnership ecosystem. So having said all this, our market segmentation, our go-to-market strategy is very specific. When you look at mega enterprises, large enterprises, medium enterprises, what we see from customers like this, they are looking for private cloud implementations alongside with hybrid cloud implementations, and they're building their ecosystems around the investments they've already made. They already made investments around VMware, around Citrix, around Microsoft, whereas they're still looking for new opportunities around open source innovation via OpenStack, CloudStack, and some public cloud implementations for certain selected applications. Like some of the banks, I just got an email today from a CIO in Europe from a big bank talking about a new workload they have for a mobile app, banking app. They're not going to keep that in their data center. They're not going to run that on that VMware system. They're going to put it on a local country cloud service provider, which happens to be a Nexenta customer. So having said all this, our segmentation, our go-to-market model is through partners, OEMs like Dell, Supermicro, server vendors, and also our resellers and distributors. But at the same time, for small enterprises, for small office, home office businesses or consumers, Nexenta chose to partner with cloud service providers. Whereas many storage vendors see cloud service providers as a threat, at Nexenta we see them as a big customer segment, big partner, as a route to market to touch customers in consumer space, SOHO space, as well as small business space. What we see today, and I'm sure Simon, you agree, and you kind of mentioned, in small business level, in SOHO level, customers are looking for new channels and new type of deployment and trying to cut the cost through cloud services and not necessarily build their own data centers, where Nexenta with its partners win a lot because cloud service providers like that OpenSDx, open source collaboration and software-defined everything innovation on commodity hardware to be able to deliver profit margins to themselves as a business, whereas also a cost-effective solution to their customers in small business level. So this slide basically shows that Nexenta has a route to market for large enterprises and public services through private cloud implementations primarily, but also providing hybrid cloud services. But on the small business side, consumer side, deliver the same service through hosting services, telco customers as a partner, deliver the solution to them through those partners. So overall, Nexenta's story goes back to what Simon talked about, all about choice, all about flexibility, and obviously with performance and capacity, but also delivering customers at all cost of ownership never seen before. According to an analyst group that they just analyzed today, in the enterprise level, customers are spending nearly $2,500 per terabyte. This was an average number from an analyst group. I'm sure some of the numbers that Simon, you're seeing is also similar. We see the same implementation with similar service level agreements, nearly 60, 70% less. In some deployments, maybe the cost level will be different depending on the need, but we're seeing in general 60 to 80% cost savings with a software-defined storage approach. So on that note, we've done a few analysis vis-a-vis different storage vendors, legacy versus service providers, and as Nexenta, we proved that both from a cost perspective, both CapEx and OpEx. It's not only CapEx, but also OpEx, how you maintain the storage, but also from a performance perspective, we delivered the best value to our customers based on the customer feedback. This was a VDI implementation study. Among 13 vendors, we provided as Nexenta the lowest cost per desktop in CapEx and OpEx. And actually, we're deploying the solution right now at SoftBank and few other companies that we're working with in production with the lowest cost possible with the highest IOPS. And these numbers are actually delivered to our customers with actual performance data. So beyond that, just wanted to leave the presentation with one slide talking about an actual customer, one of our reference customers and partners at the same time. This is public information. You can find this slide actually on the internet. Wipro is one of our key partners and customers around the world. Like Simon, exactly, they're moving into an OpenSDx, open source collaborative, software-defined, everything innovative data center where they are using many different vendors from VMware to Citrix to Microsoft, OpenStack, CloudStack, and they chose Nexenta as software-defined storage de facto standard. They moved many of their old legacy systems to Nexenta on commodity platforms, and actually some of those legacy system vendors won the server business with Nexenta, delivering server systems with Nexenta on top, basically end-to-end storage for their tier 1 storage as well as tier 2 and tier 3 storage for home directories, file shares, mail storage, all their Exchange platform, all their VDI stores for 140,000 VM, single pane orchestration. Today, primarily block and file, just like Simon said, definitely moving to object in the next 2-3 years and gaining nearly 60 to 80% cost savings. These are not just slides, these are actual customer metrics from customers and partners like Wipro. So having said all this, obviously Nexenta is proud of a great success in 2014. We're starting 2015 also with a lot of energy and passion, growing our business tremendously fast thanks to the knowledge we get from partners like 451. And over the past 2014 timeframe, Nexenta won several awards. And as a matter of fact, we won an award in every single competition from our partners and customers, which we're very proud of it. And obviously, this is a little bit of a marketing slide, but it's important to let our customers and partners know that they're working with a company is not only focusing on necessarily the price point or the choice or the partnerships, but also the success stories with the customers themselves. Today on our website, we have about 50 plus case studies, another 20 case studies coming in every day. Every week, we're working with customers to provide new case studies to exactly prove what just Simon talked about. Software-defined storage is a reality. It's not just hype. It's not just smoke screens. We've seen our customers deploying that, and they actually deploy it, and they're happy about it, and they want to talk to the other customers in a customer advocacy ecosystem, so to speak. So basically, among all of these ingredients and components of our success, one area we're also focusing heavily is service and support. First time in our history, first time in the marketplace, Nexenta brought in pre-sales and post-sales services under one organization, delivering support services to every customer as part of every single purchase order. So service and support to us is not just a choice, it's a must. It's part of our customer engagement model. And as a matter of fact, I don't want to put Simon on the spot, but when we talked about first time, Simon came to me and said, look, appliance model works because it's easy to deploy and customers know whose throat to choke. When people do software-defined storage, there are multiple components. It delivers all the benefits, but there are multiple components the customer need to deal with. But the benefits are so overwhelming, customers are okay to deal with those components as long as the vendor ecosystem provides the right service support. And we took that idea, we took that advice from Simon over the past 24 months, and Nexenta built a 50 people strong organization all day long, all they do, without any commissions, no extra cost, delivers service and support to our customers. So that's a big focus on what we're focusing on as a company as we move forward. So on that note, I want to thank Simon again for being with us today, live from London. We're very happy. This webinar is being recorded. If you saw some slides you liked, and you want to look back at them, please go back to the recording on our website. We're going to make it available on our website at nexenta.com. Also, if you're interested to any of these slides, please email us. Our email information is on the slides, and also on our Twitter handles. For Tarkan Maner, it's at Tarkan Maner. You can find us easily on the web. Please reach out to us, and we provide the slides and we make them available to you. So on that note, let me turn to Christina. Christina is today the Chief Operating Officer of this call, of this webinar. Christina, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Tarkan. We actually received quite a few questions related to predictions 2 and 3, which is the new style of IT and software-defined momentum. The first question is, what are some of the barriers you hear to SDS adoption?
So barriers to SDS adoption, Simon. I think you talked about this a little bit, but maybe elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah.
Maybe some examples.
Yeah. I mean, so I think the first one is what do you actually mean by SDX, by software-defined data center, by software-defined storage? I think. Obviously there are lots of approaches. There are lots of vendors advocating slightly different approaches, and actually some software-defined approaches don't look too dissimilar from the way that storage has always been sold. So I think that's kind of figuring out what's real, what's different versus what's same old is part of the challenge for any customer. And I do kind of sympathise with any customer looking to figure out what's happening in the landscape. So I think that's one thing. I touched on, and Tarkan touched on the one throat to choke and the appeal of the appliance model. I think many customers have reached that point where yes, there is that value of having that single vendor and having the software tightly bound to the hardware. But ultimately, that isn't solving my problems. That's actually, the more of those I deploy, the more vendors I bring in of those types of boxes, the worse my problems become. It solves one point problem, but it adds to the overall to the overall problem. So I think kind of getting away from that mindset, I think is an education, is an exercise that perhaps we all need to go through. Another point that came out in our research, talking to customers evaluating software-defined approaches, is yes, I'm interested in this, but firstly, how do I migrate my current environment into a software-defined environment? What are the pitfalls? What are you going to do to help make that process as easy and as hassle-free and as risk-free as possible? Anybody who's involved with storage knows the pains that organizations go through to migrate between systems. Migrating is one of the huge pain points in storage. So organizations are interested in software-defined approaches, but it needs to be compatible with their existing environment, and it also needs to be they need to feel comfortable in moving from their traditional environment into the new software-defined environment. I'd say some of those are some of the key issues that we're starting to hear.
So the one thing, Christina, before we go to the next question, I would add to everything Simon said, which I agree. And by the way, we have a small live audience in this place as well. They're like all nodding as Simon is talking. I have Thomas Corneli with me here, our Chief Product Officer in the audience. He's like virtual high-fiving Simon right now as Simon is talking. When we look at it from a CEO perspective, obviously running a business, the choices I made personally as an investor, as an executive in the company, was choosing the right technology, right company with a disruptive approach. When disruption is the core story, obviously education and the hype curve, the hype cycle becomes a critical part of that continuum around adoption. So having said all this, ignorance becomes the #1 competition, #1 barrier to success. And actually that's a welcome for us. That's something we welcome on a daily basis, because that helps us differentiate ourselves vis-a-vis legacy solutions. And that's the reason Nexenta is growing so fast. So having said all this, I just been to a customer just recently. They don't want us to reveal the name. Let me put it this way, they are in New Jersey and one of the largest telcos around the world. So when I went to visit the customer, there were 30 people in the room with my sales manager for New Jersey. When we went to the meeting, many people didn't know what software-defined storage was, and these are very high-level executives, some of them storage executives in this big telco. And as I mentioned earlier, 30% of our revenue, the revenue we generated, almost $300 million ecosystem revenue we generated in the last 6 years, 30% of it, almost $100 million of it, is all telcos and hosting services. And this number one telco has people in the room, 50% of the room does not know what software-defined storage is all about. They never heard about some of the things we've been working on. The good news is they didn't know, so it gives us a chance to set the stage and set the expectations. But at the same time, it made me realize, as we're having these webinars and these calls and these meetings and big success story, it takes me back again to 2002, 2003 timeframe when we were talking about VDI with Diane Green, at that time the CEO of VMware, founder of VMware. People were laughing at us, and now we're talking about VDI as one of the key platforms for instance, for object storage. So disruption is a good thing, change is a good thing. It's a painful thing, specifically for those companies who are leading, who are pioneers. It was never easy for Christophe Colomb to come up with Americas. It took a little bit of time, a lot of financing from the royal family in Spain, some Genovese to find money somewhere else. Obviously, we don't have that kind of a problem. There's a lot of financing, there's a lot of support, because investors believe there's huge opportunity in this business. And customers believe there is cost saving. So on that note, Christina, let's move to your next question.
Great. So the next question is, where do you see hyper-convergence playing in the move to software-defined storage?
Simon?
Yeah, so I'll kick off on that. So hyper-convergence has, as I think I said, has gone from nowhere to everywhere in the space of a year, a bit like software-defined, itself. If 2014 was the year of the all-flash array, we think 2015 could be the year of hyper-convergence. Maybe quickly it would be good to start with a definition, because again there are lots of different approaches out there, but essentially we're talking about software that can be loaded onto a cluster of industry standard servers and turn that cluster into a converged application platform with integrated SAN-like storage or even NAS-like storage. So it's turning a cluster of industry standard servers into a smart enterprise storage system that you're running the application right on that system, and it's optimized for the virtual machine. So a year ago, I would say there were maybe a small handful of startups plowing this furrow. Everything changed, I think, in the summer when VMware brought out a capability called vSAN. And essentially vSAN is VMware's hyper-converged play, and really that was VMware saying, let's try and do for the storage space what the hypervisor did for the server space, because they, like many other organizations and suppliers, have figured out that actually some of the fundamental problems that we haven't solved are in the storage domain. So how do we make storage easier? How do we make it more aware and more closely integrated with the VM? So roll forward to today, we have many organizations now in this hyperconverged space with a range of offerings. I think from an adoption perspective, it's still very, very early days. I think in the first instance, we'll see hyperconverged solutions being embraced in smaller environments, small to mid-sized businesses and enterprises, I would say, where there tends to be a dearth of IT skills, of storage skills in particular. It's also good, I think, going to be popular in remote office, branch office environments, so where you have an organization, a retailer, for example, has lots of branches.
Banking.
Yeah, banking, retail, and they've got, they have to have a storage, their server, a couple of applications in every one of maybe hundreds or even thousands of sites. Supporting that environment and separate storage server networking in that environment is a nightmare. So this is one route, hyperconvergence is one route to simplicity. So I think we'll see it there. I think there's starting to be some interest in application environments that are fairly self-contained, so VDI being one. So yeah, I'd point out remote office, branch office, smaller environments and applications like VDI has been some of the initial areas where we're seeing traction for that type of offering.
But to add to that, from an Nexenta perspective, there are some smaller hyper-converged companies. They're focusing on that. They're doing their own branded appliance, and they've been very successful and redefined the market on the hyper-converged space, along the lines that Simon just talked about for specifically like branch operations. We've seen it in the VDI workloads, obviously, hyper-converged. And mostly what we see is from a vendor perspective, in those workloads and market segments where there is a purpose-built need for a specific convergence, a converged system. And beyond getting into architectural definitions, which Simon covered, which I don't want to do that again, but on top of that, what we're seeing from a market landscape perspective, with VMware is doing with vSAN now as part of the Evo Rail, what Citrix is doing around Zen, what Microsoft doing now with storage spaces, and obviously with the Windows 2012 server storage capabilities underneath, and also heavily what the server vendors in x86 world doing with Dell with their own hyper-converged story, Supermicro, Quanta, Cisco, HP now, Lenovo with the IBM servers. They all have hyper-converged strategies. What we see from these companies are working with software-only pure plays SDS, software-defined storage companies, and build their own unique hyper-converged systems. So as Nexenta, we made a choice. Rather than being in a hyper-converged company, we use our software-defined storage technology ingredient as a differentiator to OEM, to these x86 server vendors, for them to create their hyper-converged. So we don't want to compete with our channel. There are OEM partners. We enable them to partner with others. So we partner with VMware and Dell. We partner with VMware and Supermicro and so on. Today, Nexenta has more than 20 OEM server vendor partners around the world, which delivers both software-defined storage workloads, also hyper-converged workloads based on their own needs and geographies and customer segments. So that's a little bit our view based on what we've seen in our customer segments. So, Christina, any other questions?
We are at the top of the hour, so we have we're time for one more question, which is, you talk of open source software, but will we see an uptick in open source hardware like the Open Compute platform?
Good question. What do you think?
So yeah, that is a good question. I think interest is there. I think the momentum there and the broad appeal is a little bit behind where we are on the where we are on the software side. I think for a certain class of organization, if you're, for example, a hyperscale provider, if you are running a data center at significant scale and looking to grow significantly in the future, then open compute, that type of approach is certainly interesting. I don't think we're quite ready for a prime time with that type of offering, but it's certainly a pretty interesting space for sure.
From a Nexenta perspective, very quickly, as we're finishing the call, we haven't heard from Open Compute world a lot in the last few years, but in the last few quarters, we're getting some large customers who want to emulate what Facebook, Yahoo, and Google did with Open Compute strategies, now trying to deploy some of these capabilities internally in their own data centers. They have some success, and they're working with us on some of their strategies. But from an open source software perspective, I think that's the big story today. I just want to finalize with this. From the beginning, as Nexenta, we believed in open source. The company is started in 2008, but actually the original founders of the company have been working with the ZFS, Zettabyte File System, for the past 12 to 14 years. And the ecosystem developers all around this file system have been open source innovating for a long time. But now, as Simon talked about, with our new object storage vision, now we're bringing that legacy ZFS file system innovating to our version 5 product with a new distributed vision around ZFS. But beyond that, with scale-out capabilities now, cloud copy on write, we're moving that to the next generation architectural. And I welcome everyone on this call and others to check out our website for more information around open source collaboration, which meets software-defined data center innovation. That's what we call OpenSDx as Nexenta. And again, later this month and early February, we're at VMware PAX, Partner Exchange in San Francisco. Later in Vancouver, in OpenStack Conference, at Citrix Synergy in May, and again at VM World later in end of August, early September in San Francisco, delivering some of our new technologies and new solutions for our customers and partners. So on that note, thank you for being with us today and this webinar. Thank you, Simon, for being with us. Like you've been with us also several times, also last year in January. We enjoy working with you. We want to do this again with you. And I also want to thank the entire 451 research team and Nexenta team to make this thing happen. And thank you, our audience, for being part of this today. Talk to you soon.